Well, good morning, everyone. We'll get started. Thanks for being here with us today. My name is Arnold Weinfeld. I'm Associate Director for the MSU Institute for Public Policy and Social Research. Pleased that you can join us for our second in a series of three legislative staff trainings that we host throughout the course of a year. I'm very pleased today to have with us presenters with a good deal of information. That includes Dr. Matt Grossman, who is the Institute Director. Dr. Grossman will be talking about what resources IPPSR can offer to legislative staffers. We also have Bob Schneider from the Citizens Research Council. Bob will be talking about the current transportation proposals and their impact on the state budget. And very pleased to have with us Karen Kudelko, who's Senior Deputy Director of Federal Affairs for the Office of the Governor in Washington, D.C. And she'll be speaking to the impact of the federal reorganization taking place and downsizing and its impact on Michigan. And with that, I think we'll start with Dr. Grossman.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. We were asked to give a little bit of overview of the things that are offered by the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research at MSU. This staff training evolved out of the orientation that we do for newly elected legislators about a month after they are first elected, when lots of people ask to either bring their staff or have the sessions repeated for their staff. So originally it was sort of let's do that orientation again at the beginning of the year for legislative staff. But it evolved into first a certificate program for staff to attend events throughout the year, and then to where we are now, which is a sort of offerings based on legislative needs and current issues as they come. But we are open to trying to shift or add to the offerings that we do have for legislative staff. We also have programming for legislative interns and an internship award program that we do in concert with James Madison College. So please send your interns to that. It's 6 sessions a year total. One that is kind of an introduction to getting the most out of your internship with a panel of staff, and then one about opportunities in Michigan government at the end of their internships. So the idea is to be able to have offerings to people when they first get started working in the legislature all the way to when they get elected. We also have separately, but relatedly, a forum series that is fairly monthly, not quite monthly through the summer, but when the legislature is here regularly, we try to offer a forum series that's much more directly about public policy issues facing the legislature. We may have one in May, but the one that we know we'll be having is June 17th, where we'll be talking about tariffs and effects on Canada and Michigan. We'll have someone from the Consul's Office of Canada, as well as a trade and supply chain researcher from MSU, to talk about how people are adapting to changes in tariff policy and also effects on Michigan and the Michigan-Canada relationship. For both of those, the staff training and the forum series, we do take suggestions, and they can come in the form of this is just an issue I want to hear more about, to this is a specific person I think should speak to us, and we have an ability to cobble things together from there. So please let us know what you'd like to hear more about policy-wise in the coming months. We also want to offer a more open-ended connection with researchers, particularly at Michigan State, but also at other universities in the state. That is, we can be a resource for connecting you to academics or academic practitioners or people in extension who could be helpful to your work. And all that takes is an inquiry to Arnold or me or anyone at IPPSR, and we can help connect you with a researcher that you might be interested in speaking with. Having a form suggestion might also bleed into developing a relationship with a researcher who could help. Now, we're going to be a little bit different than some other resources that you have. We know that the sort of go-to for most legislative staff is going to be the caucus policy offices, and we absolutely are supportive of those relationships and help to build that expertise as well. But we know that sometimes you also want to have a sense, maybe a broader sense of with the research that's out there surrounding a public policy issue or a rising issue or what's happening in other states, and we can help with all of that. We also try to work closely with the Legislative Services Bureau, which also, as most of you know, offers a research office and a direct research inquiry that goes only to you and your office when you make that inquiry. We're also able to provide a similar kind of service. That is, if you ask us to connect you with research or a researcher and you only want that information to go to your office, we are happy to do that. But there is a bit of a difference in what kinds of things we can handle. It is legal staff, lawyers over there mostly, who are handling inquiries about the history of Michigan policy, the specifics of legal implementation, and what's happening in other states, but what's happening in other states from a fairly legalistic, what is the policy on the books kind of perspective. We are a little bit less on the ground and specific, and a little bit more on kind of the research side. So what are other states doing? If the question is what are other states doing, and what is the overall body of evidence about the effectiveness or the trade-offs involved in those topics, we're happy to handle those and are able to connect you with related research. Now, our answers may be a little bit less specific, and we're more willing to say that we don't know or the research is inconclusive, but we're happy to handle those as well. We're also happy to connect you with think tanks and other providers of information. And we know that you have lots of folks to go to out there, but just wanted to provide that link. One place that we are able to provide that fairly directly is that we have an internal grant program called the Michigan Applied Public Policy Research Program that is about to actually go out at MSU and will offer researchers grants to tackle issues that are before the Michigan legislature. So you also have the ability to try to get researchers at MSU to address issues that you may not find research on. And this doesn't have to be about what's happening in other states or the current body of research. It can be about what's happening in a specific locality in Michigan, or what are the effects of a new policy that's just been implemented, or an analysis of policy that has been proposed. So if you're interested in that, we can often try to connect you with a researcher, not just who has done it, but who might be able to carry out a research project like that. And they're likely to listen to us because we have funding to help them carry out some of that research as well. And now's the time to connect with us out there. We also have a large body of research that's already been collected on issues that were before the Michigan legislature. If you look at IPPSR.msu.edu and go to those MAPR grants, you'll see that we help people put together policy memos so that they can translate research from an academic perspective to a practitioner and policy perspective. And so if you have trouble finding anything, or you want to know, has anyone covered this particular issue, just let us know and we'll connect you with that. We also are the home of the survey research that takes place at Michigan State University, and we have two regular surveys that you may be interested in. One is the State of the State survey, which is a 3 times a year survey of Michigan residents that's been done since the 1990s. If you want to look at change over time and things like consumer confidence or the opinions of policy or economic circumstances, please take advantage of that resource. We do reports each time, but we also can collect data if you want some overtime analyses of any of that. We also have a related survey of what we call policy insiders, which is all of you and people who work in the administration and the lobbying corps in Lansing. So we get regular comparisons between how political insiders or political elites view policy issues and the state versus how the public looks at it. We also have a research database that looks at research outside of MSU all over that is related to public policy issues that the state might be facing. And we have undergraduate students try to summarize that research for policy practitioners. We can offer that service to you, or you can look at our research database for the ones that have already done. A little bit more higher up the required analyses level, we have something called the Correlates of State Policy, which is a data analysis resource that looks at differences across states. So everything that you can think of that can be measured for all 50 states in each year or in each every 2 years, we have tried to compile in one large database. It has thousands of variables going back 100 years. So obviously we have more information on the more current period, and we don't have everything updated until like last year, most of them in 2 or 3 years ago. So this is mostly used by academic researchers to look at differences across states. It can be used to examine the kinds of things that lead to policy differences across states, like we have these political factors, these economic factors, these social factors that are driving policy differences. But then it can also be used to look at the effects of those policy changes, like these states expanded Medicaid, these states did not. What was the change afterwards in the states that did versus did not? Now, this does require a higher level of expertise, but we're happy to walk you through it. If you have a question that you think might be handled by that type of data, please let us know, and we're happy to do so. Plus, the last thing I'd like to mention is the Michigan Political Leadership Program, which many of you know is a half Democrat, half Republican our traveling program around the state of Michigan that trains 24 fellows a year. And applications are now open to that. They are targeted at people who might want to run for office. Or who are currently working at a local level, but we have lots of state legislative staff who apply for that program and succeed in that program. So if you're ever thinking about possibly running for office yourself, please get in touch with us and you just have to fill out an initial interest form that lets us know that you are participating at mplp.msu.edu. And then we'll get you in the track. You do need letters of recommendation, but it's helpful to just get your first input there. We have 17 members of the legislature who are graduates of our program, and so it does serve as a pipeline for elected officials in the state. And it's also just a good way to get to know people across the aisle who are aspiring leaders in Michigan from across the state, and to actually get to travel the state and learn about related policy issues and related differences across different places. So get in touch with us if you need any further information, or go to our website at ippsr.msu.edu.
Thank you, Matt. As I noted, if you have a question, please use the chat box. I don't see anything there right now. And so maybe before we move on to our next presenter, if anyone has a question, please go ahead and we'll take a moment, raise your hand. Again, as I noted, this session is being recorded and will be available on our website sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours once we process. So I'm not seeing any hands raised, so thank you very much, Matt. And we'll move on to our next presenter, Karen Kudelko, who's with the Office of Governor Whitmer in Washington, D.C. And Karen will be discussing the changes taking place in federal government on a daily basis, as well as its impact on the state of Michigan. And Karen, we can see your presentation. You might want to hit the from the beginning or the little icon. And there we go. Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. It's all yours. Oops, may have to unmute you. I'm sorry. Hang on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
Yep, sure can. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So, thanks so much. Yeah, so I am Karen Kudelko with the governor's DC office. Today I'll be talking about some federal funding cuts, freezes, and impacts to the state that we're seeing. I'll talk a little bit about the Fed Affairs Office and what we do here in DC. And then, with the new administration, we've started tracking a lot of different changes and shifts. So I'll touch on some themes across a few different categories and zero in on some examples. And then at the end, I'll provide an outlook for the very wonky budget reconciliation process. To the extent that I can, as I'm not an expert, but we are all becoming experts these days as we move through things pretty quickly. So the governor and the state of Michigan have a federal affairs office. We are a small but mighty team of four. You may not realize that most states, I would say about 35 states, have some sort of DC representation. Many of them have a physical office in a big building called the Hall of the States that's very near Congress. And we also kind of get together and meet through the National Governors Association and kind of compare notes on impacts to states of federal policy. Sometimes we join together on letters and stuff like that. The governor's office, like I said, has four. We have our director, Patty Redinger. There's two deputy directors, myself and my colleague Preston, who divide a series of portfolio issues. And then we have a colleague, Nathan Reynolds, who is our federal grants and appropriations manager. He gets into the weeds of the topics that I will be discussing today and keeps a really close eye on them for us. But our job generally is to basically interface for the state between the feds and the state. And it includes the governor's office, but it also includes any department within the state. So anytime Eagle or MSP has some sort of issue that they'd like to bring to the feds, whether that's the delegation or the administration, we help navigate that. Similarly, we'll get asks from the federal side for congressional testimony or questions about state best practices, and we help facilitate that conversation this way as well. We also help the governor with her position on things like, as I mentioned, the National Governors Association, but also other gatherings of governors. Currently, for example, she sits as the chair of the Great Lakes Governors and Premiers across the Great Lakes region. And she also sits on the Council of Governors, which advises the president and the administration on issues facing the National Guard. So that's a little bit about us. So since the start of the year, we've started to track a whole range of issues. There's been a lot of changes with this administration, but I'll kind of discuss them in three different categories. We've been providing pretty regular updates to our congressional offices on the impacts within the state to make sure that they're aware, and if there's anything that they can do about it, they have the evidence at their fingertips. So the first category is called tangible funding freezes. So this covers any funds or accounts that are currently on hold, including any funding that the state expects to be deposited that hasn't been, or certain funding portals that the state can't access, or reimbursements they've submitted but haven't yet received. The next category are pending funding issues of concern. So this includes grants or projects that have been awarded but not yet finalized that we're worried are either being delayed or could be delayed on the federal side. This includes things where the grant has been awarded, but maybe the agreement hasn't been finalized yet, or grant modifications or extensions that are pending but unaddressed, or programs we've applied for but not heard back, and we're starting to wonder, is the administration even going to implement these programs? So that's kind of where we keep an eye on things that more so might be coming down the pike. This is also where we've been keeping track of potential massive cuts that are coming to some of the programs that we've historically been able to rely on pretty regularly. The third category includes basically people and places. So federal employee firings or building closures that could impact our work, including where the state is tracking federal firings of known employees that we regularly work with that would impact our work with the feds, or it could harm federal programming that's really important to the state. And then also big federal building office closures in the state. So this not only impacts the programming side of things, but really the people and the economy as well within the state. So to get into a bit more detail on that first category of funding freezes, there's a few themes that have emerged. So we've seen that these happen really unexpectedly without a lot of communication or clarity. And more often than not, they also reverse course, sometimes more than once. So something might be on hold and then it's released and then it's on hold again, often without much explanation. It's not business as usual. So things that we've been able to rely on in the past, a certain cadence of dollars getting out the door, we haven't been able to rely on. And as these things have happened, the Attorney General's office has been working really closely with their state departments to engage in litigation where it makes sense to protect the state's interests. And that litigation and the results of the court orders within that litigation are directing a lot of the results of whether or not we see the funding get released or not. But even with those court orders, the administration is rarely quick to comply with them and often making arguments for why what they're doing does not fall within those court orders. So it's a pretty aggressively defensive litigation strategy that we've seen out of this administration. And it's very aggressively defensive across the board. And then the last kind of theme is that it's pretty clear that direction is coming from above. So either the White House or the DOJ, because often when we ask our departments, these are people that career people often that we work with a lot, we interface with a lot and get grants from them. And it's like we're working with the funding people on the federal side. They often have nothing to share and they're just as much in the dark as we are. And often it's directed from outside of that particular agency. So to write a few examples. So one time earlier this year, the Michigan State Police had over $100 million in emergency grants frozen by FEMA going back years. So not even just the current fiscal year. And some were directly dollars that were to come to the state. Some were pass-through dollars. And in this case, like I mentioned, when told by courts to comply and release the funds, the administration argued that, in fact, no, those funds weren't frozen. They're just in the middle of this manual review process. Eventually, the courts, again, have after the litigators came back to them multiple times, the court said, no, that's still frozen. You're going to have to let it go. And ultimately, they did comply, but it wasn't right away. The Michigan Department of Education, independent a bit of the governor's office, but we still work with them to track what they're seeing as well. They weren't receiving the normal amount of money for the Child Nutrition Block Grant. And that supplies school lunch and breakfast programs and administrative dollars for that as well. It looked like they were actually going to be unable to fund programming through May until the next month's funding came in. So basically, normally they get the funding quarterly, and suddenly they got a tranche of funding that was much smaller. And so they didn't know why. They were worried that they weren't going to have enough to carry them through. And then the next month, another amount came in. So it now seems like maybe it's monthly, but again, it's just a bit of a guess. So we're keeping an eye on that one as well. EAGLE, our Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, was tracking that's two state grantees, EcoWorks and the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission, had their funding put on hold, frozen on March 10th for community change grants. The grantees later received actual letters of termination for their grants, which was pretty shocking, as you can imagine. And then shortly thereafter, those letters of termination were rescinded. So again, lots of back and forth. A few more examples. Michigan Department of Health and Human Services received notification from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that $379.3 million of grants in Michigan were terminated. These were for mental health and substance abuse, and also supported infectious disease control and vaccinations for children and vulnerable adults. Again, kind of out of the blue, no reason for the termination. It's just what was moving forward. And then most recently, our Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, or LEO, was informed by AmeriCorps that they are terminating over $15 million in Michigan's FY24 grant funding with no notice. This was just on April 25th. This impacts nearly 700 currently serving members across more than 20 organizations who will lose access to the remainder of their living stipend, education award, and other benefits, including healthcare coverage, childcare assistance, and eligible full-time members. So LEO also expected to enroll over 200 additional members before the end of the program. That probably is not going to happen at this point. So to give a sense of the impact in service year 23 to 24, AmeriCorps funding engaged over 1,000 service members with over 618,000 hours of service. And the economic impact of those hours is estimated to be about 19.5 million. So moving on to category 2, this was kind of pending areas of concern, a few themes that we've seen here looking ahead and kind of getting a little bit worried about all of this stuff that's happening officially with the freezing, now looking ahead and wondering what could happen next. Unfortunately, in this area, rumor reigns. As I said, there's not been a lot of communication from the administration directly on plans, and so there'll be leaked memos or an insider who provides information, and so it's really hard to get information confirmed. A lot of those leaks end up in the media, so we end up relying on sharing out and flagging a lot of things that we're seeing in media reports. So we'll read an article, check with the department if that's true, if they're starting to see an impact on their funds, or if they're worried about it. And that's kind of how we get a lot of our information. In this area, pretty much everything's fair game. Like I said before, what we were able to expect and rely on isn't really the case anymore. So this includes grants that are awarded but not really signed, extension requests, and programs that Congress has authorized and directed the federal government to carry out. In some cases, the government's just simply refusing to do so. Many make the argument that that means they're legislating from the executive branch, and that's some of the arguments that I think are being heard in courts as well. And then also looking ahead, I'll explain a little bit more as we get to the budget reconciliation piece, but we've got some pretty big cuts coming down the pike. So we've got some examples. First, there's money that we're losing or expected to lose. So FEMA's canceled the MSP administered Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC, grants for FY24, which means they're just not seeking applications. They're not moving forward with the program. That program would have included $4 million guaranteed to Michigan, with more anticipated competitively. And FEMA is also canceling all of their FY20 through 23 grants and are not going to award projects that had been selected in those years, but not yet awarded. We're also looking at the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law. Michigan received a lot of really big wins through those pieces of legislation, but now we're kind of worried if we're ever going to see the money for it. For example, while we've yet to receive official word, we're concerned, again, through media reports, that the administration might roll back a select number of hydrogen hubs that they had set up, including possibly the Midwest Hydrogen Hub that Michigan is participating in with Illinois and Indiana. The hub moved into phase 1 this past fall with a $22.2 million commitment from the Department of Energy to foster the deferment of clean hydrogen energy. But now we're a little bit worried that that's kind of never going to come to fruition. In fact, the reports on that one were that, at least in the media, were that the administration was targeting specifically hubs that are largely Democratic and not the Republican-leaning hubs to cut. Again, no clarity, no sense of if that's true or not, but we're continuing to keep an eye on it. We're also working to ensure that Michigan receives the over $22 million in Department of Energy dollars that were committed also under the prior administration to support small and medium-sized manufacturers through the electric vehicle transition. This is funding that we actually fought for in the state of Michigan because we recognize what a big impact it'll have all the way down the supply chain. Again, not really sure where that's going to land. And then looking ahead to cuts, I'll get a little bit into this when I talk more about budget reconciliation, but essentially the House Agriculture Committee is going to need to find $230 billion in cuts, with expectations that those will largely be to SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. Most recently, there's talk of states being forced to pay a portion of that SNAP food assistance benefits, moving forward through the potential way that they want to change it, with reports as low as 5% of the state needing to pay and up to 50% of the state needing to pay that. MDHHS has estimated that a 50% state share would cost the state about $1.5 billion plus administrative costs each year. Another one we're watching is that FEMA may no longer exist. The president has set up a FEMA council to advise him and DHS on how and in what manner the FEMA dollars should go out the door and the activities of that program should move forward. The governor is providing her input on that through the Council of Governors and in conjunction with the Michigan State Police Emergency Management Homeland Security Division. But the administration put out a memo, I think last week or the week before, talking about how they're rebalancing their role in disasters, that in the manner of reducing the threshold, or sorry, increasing the threshold for public assistance and not finalizing certain approvals when it comes to disaster response. You're likely all tracking the massive ice storm that we had in Michigan. We are still working on our disaster request to the president and gathering all of the information. We should hope to have that by mid-May. And when we submit that, we're really going to be advocating hard because with this new policy out there, it's going to be a lot harder for folks to get approvals on disaster response funding through FEMA. And then looking ahead, the big one you might be hearing about is Medicaid. There's been a lot of studies the past few weeks. The estimates are that they're looking at cutting Medicaid by adding work requirements that would save money, and then also lowering the amount that the feds pay to the state. So when we look at the impact of work requirements, you can see on the slide here some pretty massive impacts, losing hundreds of thousands of enrollees, tens of millions of lost state and local tax revenue. There's also the federal funding cuts that would be expected, loss in state GDP, and up to tens of thousands of jobs lost. You know, the state budget office has also looked at some studies that say 29,400 jobs actually could be lost when you really expand and look at the full impact on the healthcare industry and then even beyond the healthcare industry. So just a reminder here, you know, Medicaid covers 45% of births in Michigan. 300,000 people are living with disabilities are covered by Medicaid. 168,000 seniors are covered by Medicaid. And then when we look at the kind of tangible impacts on people's lives, you know, the anticipated losses are going to be almost 500,000 falling off the rolls and becoming insured with an estimate of, you know, 1,500 actual lives lost annually. When you add all of this up, the state budget office is looking at over a $2 billion impact, a financial hit to Michigan if these policies move forward. With a state that has a $14 billion operating budget, that's just a cost that we're not going to be able to absorb. And it's going to be pretty tough. So in good news, we are still in the process of budget reconciliation and hoping that our congressionals kind of realize the impact of what they're looking at and adjust. But first, the third category, people and places. This is the office buildings and the firings and cuts and closures. So in this area, rumor reigns again, media reports reign again. And in fact, even in media reports, there's often inaccurate information shared about some office being closed, but you look it up and really there's no office that exists there. And DOJ reports closing something that really doesn't even exist. So it's hard to parse through the facts in this area as well. As I said earlier, this does have impacts to programs and policies pretty directly, and also more widely impacts the economy. So looking to kind of impacts on the people, Leo has been tracking unemployment claims filed, which gives light to federal firings because they can track how many unemployment claims are for federal employees. It might not be a direct result always of the administrative actions, but I think when you look at the numbers, you can see a pretty strong difference from years past. So in total, from January 1st to April 14th, there were 371 total federal claims filed for unemployment. They've been across 28 federal departments. The ones with the most claims are Treasury with 114, Ag with 60, Postal Service with 48, the VA with 41, and Interior with 31. And the team also compared this data to claims filed over the same period last year. And there was at least 153% increase over the same period last year in terms of number of claims. So we're really starting to see a significant impact from the administration's policies and shifts. For some more examples, DOGE is reportedly proposing staffing cuts of up to 50% of the workforce in the Department of Energy, with the reductions in force hitting key priorities like clean energy, grid resilience, and state community programs being hit the hardest. Those are pretty important to us in the state of Michigan, so we'll be watching that closely. The Department of the Interior issued an order directing department leadership to review and report on the hours of operation for each of their parks, their national parks, and proposed limitations or closures of visitor services. And as we have 5 national parks and historic sites within Michigan, with, of course, significant economic and tourist impacts, this is one that we're also watching closely. When reached out to the DOI, they claimed that this is just them trying to make sure that the parks have the resources that they need to stay open as much as possible, but we've yet to see the results of that directive going out. This one was interesting. DOGE shared that they terminated a lease for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office space in Ann Arbor. But reaching out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they actually indicated there's no such office, but there is a U.S. Geological Survey office, which houses the Great Lakes Science Center. And we are hearing that there are cuts and terminations of leases to that. So we've reached out to DOI and are trying to get information on if they actually plan to close that. That's a really important center that tracks impacts of, that tracks water levels and helps us do water management and flood management, not just for Michigan, but across the Great Lakes. Overall, the General Services Administration has announced it's planning to end about 1,000 federal space leases nationwide. And on the list, while it was posted online briefly before it was taken down, someone, I guess, got a screenshot, but on the list were 26 locations across Michigan in Battle Creek, Detroit, Fort Huron, and Saginaw. So that's kind of what we've been seeing looking back. Looking ahead, we're in the middle of this budget reconciliation process. So you might have heard this, and I'll touch a little bit at the highest level what this is about, but it's basically a special process to move high priority fiscal legislation. In the Senate, reconciliation bills can't be filibustered, which is a huge advantage to people who want to move it quickly. And the scope of the amendments is also limited. And it can also pass the Senate with a simple majority instead of the 3/5 that's often required for important legislation. It has limits to what it can do, but it can change mandatory spending like Medicare, Medicaid, federal retirement, SNAP, and farm programs without having to go through the typical full authorization and then appropriations process. And through the process, committees are directed to make changes. So they are directed to increase or decrease spending. And often we'll see sometimes the House just mark up the bills and the Senate kind of holding and basically negotiating behind the scenes to make sure that whatever the House passes, the Senate will be able to quickly pass as well. So that's what reconciliation is overall. What's the plan right now for the reconciliation process according to leadership? Well, the House signed, the Senate adopted budget resolution on April 10th. That's sort of the directive for how this process will move forward. They decided on that April 10th, and then the House committees have been trying to do their markups the last 2 weeks, carrying forward the directives that have been provided to those committees on where to cut and how to cut. So of note, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce is expected to cut $880 billion. They're the ones who have jurisdiction over Medicaid. The House Ag Committee is the one that has jurisdiction over SNAP. They're expected to cut $230 billion. The House and Senate each have their own approach to the budget and kind of their own, here's what I would love to see. But the House is looking to cut 1.5 trillion and the Senate looking to cut 4 billion. That's a pretty wide gap. And so that'll make pre-negotiating the bill. So if the House passes all of its bills through markup and sends it over to the Senate, they're trying to behind the scenes negotiate to make sure that it'll pass the Senate. But that makes these negotiations really hard when the two chambers are as far apart as they are on the top line numbers. After the markups, the House Budget Committee is going to combine all of the parts of the package of all these different House markups and send it to both chambers, which ultimately, which Speaker Johnson is hoping to do and is committed to do by Memorial Day. So is it working? Are we there? Are we on track? Unfortunately, the markups have already been delayed with leadership disagreeing about how to handle Medicaid cuts. The House Ways and Means Committee has aimed to tackle cuts this week, but that's also been tied up over how to handle the states and local tax deduction cap. You've got Republicans in high tax blue states that are pushing for an increase in the cap, which is sort of mucking up some of the conversations of Republicans trying to get costs down actually through the bill. There's also green energy tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act that are hotly debated, with some Republicans calling for a full repeal of those. And then mixed up in all of this, Republicans are also trying to extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts, which can, as you can imagine, get pretty expensive, meaning that they have to find other places to make up those dollars. Excuse me. And then to make everything even more fun, the president released his budget this past Friday for this same time period for FY26. And complicates things because he's now pushing for a 13% increase in defense spending, which would put it over $1 trillion for the first time ever, and a 65% increase in DHS spending. In order to offset those, he's looking to also include a 48% cut to the State Department, 44% to HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department, and over 26% to HHS. So Memorial Day frankly seems optimistic, but I think this week is going to be a good signal as to what's to come. So I recognize I've only left about 5 minutes for questions, but wanted to keep things moving and get through a lot of content as much as I could. I left my contact information up here in case anyone wants to reach out for follow-up questions, but I'm also happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you, Karen. Very informative. We're going to let's leave that slide up there for a moment with your contact information. Obviously, your office is working every day to track the changes, the pronouncements that are coming forward from the administration. Do you have, aside from your contact information here, I don't know if you have a web page where you have continuing, rolling information that people can access, but certainly as you noted, as the state moves into its own budget process, which it's doing, impacted by what's taking place at the federal level, I'm sure that our staff offices, member offices are going to be receiving questions from constituents, both on state and federal matters, and certainly state will be impacted by federal. So I don't know if you have a web page that they can access to see what the latest information is.
It's a great question, Arnold. Unfortunately, maintaining and having such a web page would be an entire job in and of itself. I think, as you saw, the amount that we get changes, week to week is the kind of level of information that we're giving to our congressional delegation. But even within that, it changes back and forth all the time, day to day, sometimes hourly. So we unfortunately don't have a location where the information is shared. But I will say that we're working very closely with our departments and with the state budget office. I would point people, if they have any particular questions about a program or dollars or how the feds are impacting things, to first go to the relevant department within the state. They're keeping the closest track, and often when we get questions from congressionals or constituents, they're the first folks that I reach out to because they have the latest information. like I said, it changes all of the time.
Mhm.
So I would definitely point folks to the departments themselves, but to the extent that they don't know, or there are, rumors that you're trying to confirm, or questions, or frankly, things that you just want to put on our radar that you're hearing from constituents or stakeholders, please feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, a lot of the information is really unclear. There's not a lot of transparency. So kind of getting the rumor mill going, unfortunately, and then working behind the scenes to try to confirm that is unfortunately the way that we've been getting our information and getting it confirmed.
Well, again, thank you very much. I don't see any comments in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised at this point in time. So we'll let you go. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thanks so
Greatly
much for having
appreciate
me.
you
Appreciate it.
taking time with us today. And I'm sure you'll be hearing probably from some staff in the future as things unfold. So, and again, to folks participating, this session will be posted on our website. So if you didn't get Karen's information there, or some of the information from the slides, we'll be sharing the slide deck as well as this recording. So thank you again, Karen. Greatly appreciate it. Now we'll turn to Bob Schneider. Bob is with the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. He has been a guest with us previously on various topics, and he'll be speaking about the competing transportation proposals the legislature is considering and their impact on the state budget. So, Bob, welcome. Thank you for being here, and take it away.
Thank you, Arnold. I'm coming through okay?
You are, and your slide deck is up. Thank you.
Okay, great. Uh, I should have done this different. My slide deck's over here, so I'm going to be looking away from the screen part of the time if you can actually see me. It's good to be here. I appreciate the invitation to come and address the legislative training session today. Great service from IPPSR for legislative staff. Hope was interested in that last presentation, learned some things on that, and I hope I'm able to convey some new information on the continuing dialogue on road funding in Michigan. So I'm with the Citizens Research Council, as Arnold said. I hope you know who we are. But we are a 108-year-old organization now, a nonprofit think tank, and we pride ourselves very much on providing independent, nonpartisan research. And we hope you're familiar with this, but if not, come and see us at our website at crcmich.org. We kind of run the gamut in state and local public policy, and I'm sure we have content that may be of interest to you, no matter what kind of public policy areas you may be working in. So today I'm going to talk about roads. In this presentation, we're going to kind of go back in time and refresh our memory about where we were and where we are now after the last major road funding agreement was reached in 2015. Then we're going to look at the two competing plans, the House plan and Governor Whitmer's proposal, and kind of look at what do they mean for road funding, and then also what do they mean for the state budget. And we'll end with some discussion of some recent CRC research on roads and some research on that not only money matters, but how we spend that money matters. And I'll close with that. So I'm going to lead with some good news. Is our starting point right now in terms of road revenue and our revenue base is actually much improved than what it was 10 years ago. This is a chart, and I borrowed this from the report that I referenced that my colleague Eric Dennis produced. It looks at road funding in Michigan from our internal Michigan Transportation Fund. That's our state sources, primarily our motor fuel tax revenue, our vehicle registration revenue, federal aid, and of course, more recently, the Rebuilding Michigan Bond initiative. And we see a tale of kind of two trends between 2004 and about 2016. Our revenues were flat. And we had two primary revenues: vehicle registrations. That was a slightly growing base, but then we relied heavily on our motor fuel tax, and at that time, that was actually shrinking and a little stagnant as we had a 19 cent per gallon flat tax per gallon purchased, and gallons purchased as vehicles got more fuel efficient. And as we were actually driving, the miles we were driving were flat and sometimes even falling. That revenue was flat. And then with inflation and road construction costs go up, we were getting further and further behind. What we did in 2015 with the roads package is change that trajectory. We do have now at least a growing base of transportation revenue, and so there has been success from that 2015 revenue package. If you see, our Michigan Transportation Fund revenues there at the bottom in blue have not quite doubled, but almost doubled over the last 10 years. So our revenues are going up instead of being stagnant and getting further and further into the hole. We do have a growing revenue base, and that's due to components of that 2015 agreement, which raised over $1 billion, about 1.2 billion, and a little more in annual revenue for roads. So what was that again? Just as a quick reminder, we bumped up our motor fuel tax. It was 19 cents per gallon for many years, bumped it up to 26.3 cents per gallon in 2017, and then importantly, indexed it to inflation. So starting in 2022, we see that motor fuel tax rate go up each year based on inflation, and that's helped us kind of keep up and have some growth in our transportation revenues. The vehicle registration fee component that we pay annually on our cars and trucks was increased roughly 20% back in 2015. And then the other important thing there is we added a new registration surcharge for hybrid and electric vehicles. Folks rightly said, well, those vehicles don't pay as much, or maybe they don't pay anything towards the gasoline tax because they don't purchase gasoline. That registration surcharge was added for those vehicles to help make up for that. So those were the new revenues. The other side was we redirected existing state revenue eventually about $600 million from our income tax that used to go to the general fund for discretionary purposes, now goes to transportation and roads. And those three things all help turn the tide so that we actually have a growing revenue base for roads. One thing I wanted to address while we were talking about the general issues with road funding, there's a lot of discussion about electric vehicles, and I just point out, that boy, we're losing ground because electric vehicles, as we continue to get more electric vehicles, we're going to get less gasoline purchases and we'll lose revenue. So this just kind of highlights the surcharge actually really, depending on how much you drive and how fuel efficient your vehicle is. In most cases, I think pure electric vehicle drivers probably pay as much, if not more, than the typical or the most typical driver of a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle. So in 2025, that surcharge, if you have an electric car, that surcharge is about $160. What if I don't drive an electric? What if I drive a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle? What do I pay? Well, that's going to depend. How much do you drive? That's on the left-hand column. And what's your fuel efficiency? So this would change. How much do you pay in gasoline tax revenue based on how much you drive and what your fuel efficiency is? And if the common amount, some people drive more, some people drive less. 12,000, 15,000 miles is kind of the realm of what's average. A lot of folks are probably equal or pay less than electric vehicles now. So I think the idea that electric vehicles aren't paying their share right now is probably a little overblown. I think electric vehicles probably pay in general about as much, if not a little more, than the average driver of a traditional vehicle. So background on our history and what our current status of our road funding is. There's recognition, and I think most agree our roads still aren't in good shape. There probably is need to some degree for new investment in the roads. So let's look at the two proposals that are out there from the House and from the governor and what they mean, one, for roads, and then two, what's the implications from the broader budget in terms of any redirecting of revenue that's done. So let's summarize. This is a quick summary of the House's road plan. The plan is pretty concrete, pretty clear. We know what the House is doing, and it would pretty clearly raise over $3 billion in revenue for roads if you enacted that plan as it sits today. The major sources of that are a shift in corporate income tax revenue to transportation. That's about $2.2 billion, and at least if corporate income tax revenue stays where it's at today. The other big piece is let's get rid of the sales tax on gasoline, and then do a revenue neutral increase in the motor fuel tax that would be equivalent of about a 20 cent. So today we have about a 31 cent per gallon gasoline tax. It would go up to about 51 cents per gallon under the House plan. For a driver, you don't notice because I'm not paying the 6% sales tax, but I'm paying this new motor fuel tax, and it roughly evens out so that you don't see much of any impact at the pump. So there's the 3.2 billion, very clear. The challenge now will be on the budget side because that corporate income tax today goes to the general fund. And when we get rid of the sales tax, we have on gasoline, we have a bunch of hits to the general fund and other funds that would, you'd have some budget holes that you would need to correct. So what are those? What are the offsetting budget reductions that might be needed to address that? First, that loss of the corporate income tax revenue, that's 2.2, that comes right out of the general fund. So we're going to need to find a way to fit into that new lower revenue for the general fund. The loss of the sales tax revenue also hits the general fund by about 120 million. And we have a hit to school aid. You have a hit to constitutional revenue sharing, which get certain allocations of our sales tax. So all told, it would be, about $3 billion, since the House plan is all about let's find revenue that we already have and move it to roads. It would have about a $3 billion redirection of revenue, which is very, very, very large. The House does have one element that will help generate some new revenue, both in the short term and then longer run. The House wants to cancel some existing corporate income tax earmarks that would generate an extra $600 million in fiscal year 25. I think the idea is then you have some money to use in 26 to help offset that revenue need, to make things balance. And then the House has talked about getting rid of some existing Michigan business tax credits. The savings from that won't kick in until fiscal year 27, but that would sort of replace the one-time savings that they get in 25 from that plan. But in the general sense, even when you bring in the $600 million, you have about $2.5 billion that the governor released a budget in February for fiscal year 26. You probably need to make reductions to the general fund appropriations in that budget, the general purpose appropriations, by about $2.5 billion. And we'll put that in context in another slide. The governor's proposal is somewhat different. It shares the exact same one element of the House proposal, which is get rid of the sales tax on gas, replace it with an increase in the motor fuel tax, and that generates about $1 billion. The governor's plan, which is not fully fleshed out, we haven't seen legislation on it. There's been no action in the legislature yet on it, so we have no fiscal agency analyses of her proposal as of yet. But she talks about increases in taxes on business, which appear to point maybe to the corporate income tax. She talks about taxing big tech firms. She talks about heavy trucks and their wear on the roads, and through some way generating another 1.6 billion there, and then the marijuana tax, increasing the current excise tax on marijuana, making it 32% of the wholesale prices, which is what equivalent to what we do for non-tobacco products, non-cigarette tobacco products, that would raise almost another $500 million. So she gets about $3 billion in her plan. She will run into while her plan relies more on new revenue, raising taxes, the governor's plan would still run into those same budget challenges with the sales tax. We would still lose sales tax revenue that currently goes to the general fund, to the school aid fund, and to revenue sharing. She also talks about a $250 million allocation for public transit, which I'm interpreting as an ongoing allocation. If you look at that plan, even the governor's plan would call for reductions to her budget recommendation from February for fiscal year 2026, more on the order of about maybe $1.2 billion from what she proposed. So just in summary, then, governor made her proposal. It's important to note that proposal from February includes roughly $500 million, depending on which account, as program enhancements, about $500 million, and new stuff, new enhancements, make programs bigger, launch new programs. If we assume, okay, well, we can't afford that now, so all that new stuff that's not already in the budget, all of that goes away. The House proposal, that still leaves a couple $1 billion, in the neighborhood of a couple $1 billion in general fund cuts that would be needed. The governor's proposal, it probably leaves about $700 million. That, just for context, the House proposal, that's about 12 or 13% of our ongoing general fund budget. The governor's proposal, that $700 million, is 4 or 5% of ongoing general fund. Those are still pretty big. Those are still pretty big increases, and they're the types of increases that you probably don't just say, well, we're just going to cut across the board. All departments that get general fund are going to get hit by 13% or 5%. You probably need to look at, we need to stop doing something that we're doing now. We need to end programs altogether, or shrink them significantly. So that will be the budget challenge of both these proposals, to differing degrees, but there will be real challenges. And just to highlight, okay, well, when we say we need to make cuts to the general fund budget, what is that budget? I hear I hear discussion of, we have an $80 billion budget. So it's huge. And 1% of an $80 billion budget is $800 million. So if we cut a 2 or 3%, we can make all this right. But the general fund budget is only about 18% of that whole budget. So the cuts are going to have to come out of the general fund budget. And that's where this pie chart sort of illustrates, okay, where do we appropriate the general fund? And about 3/4 of it are in 3 places: HHS, corrections, and universities. So those areas of the budget would need to bear a heavy brunt of any budget cuts that would be tied to the roads plan. Or if you want to kind of hold 1 or 2 of those harmless, then you even need to cut more in the light blue area that's remaining, of the 26% of the general fund budget, in all those other departments. So there will be some significant budget reprioritization that will have to happen, and some cutting that will have to come. Just a couple things, a couple side things to note. Both the governor's plan and the House plan rely heavily on redirecting or tapping into corporate income tax revenue, or raising, potentially raising the rate on the governor's plan. It's important to note, the House plan, for instance, is going to redirect $2.2 billion, and that is indeed the amount that we generate from the corporate income tax today in the general fund. But we are well above our long-term trend line. Kind of, if you go back and look from the time the corporate income tax was introduced, we were getting about a little more than $1 billion from fiscal year 2015 through about fiscal year 2020. When COVID happened and we got a big unexpected revenue boom in the state, the corporate income tax led the way. It's doubled really in revenue in those early years of COVID, and corporate profits were just very healthy. The question is, are we going to stay there? When do we, and when do we kind of come back closer to what maybe, like if you did a little trend line from fiscal year 2015 to 2020 and forecast it out, we're well above what that trend line would be. What will we may see that dip back in the future to more long run trend, which is significant. And that's an issue either way. It doesn't matter if we're using it for roads or the general fund. That's a budget issue we will need to deal with if it happens. But it means that this road funding then becomes a little more volatile potentially. The other thing that's probably worth noting is the impact of the transportation plans, again, and on both sides, the governor's plan and the House plan on EV vehicles and hybrid vehicles. Remember, we talked about the special surcharge that was developed in the 2015 plan, and I put the MCL citation here. This is the language that controls trying to keep those surcharges in line with the gasoline tax and the motor fuel tax. Whenever the motor fuel tax goes up by a penny per gallon, the plug-in hybrid vehicle surcharge goes up by $2.50. The electric vehicle surcharge goes up by $5. And I think this is something that folks maybe, I haven't heard a lot about it, so I'm not sure if there's a good understanding of it yet. But with the increase in the gasoline tax, again, if I drive a traditional internal combustion vehicle, I'm paying more gasoline tax at the pump, but less sales tax, and it kind of washes out for me for the most part. If I'm an electric vehicle owner, I'm going to have a higher surcharge, and I don't buy gasoline, so there will actually be a significant jump in those surcharges to electric vehicle and hybrid vehicle owners that hasn't been discussed much yet, but I suspect will garner more attention as we go forward. And then I'll close talking about, both the governor and the House have proposed, some significant increases in road revenue, whether it's coming from new revenue or from redirected revenue. We had my colleague Eric Dennis at the Citizens Research Council published a report in March that tried to take a broader assessment of where we're at in Michigan on road funding. And it's a huge report, a very technical report, but it's worth reading. Have an engineer friend with you because Eric digs deep into stuff, and you may need some guidance from a quantitative colleague, with all these numbers. But in short, he shows Michigan is indeed below average in terms of our road funding, but not by much. But we're further behind in our road conditions, and there appear to be other states that are in similar situations than Michigan with road funding that seem to be doing that have better outcomes, that are achieving better road outcomes than we are. So that it may not all be about road funding, about the dollars going to the roads. I do think some of it has to do with the dollars going to the roads, but there may be a broader issue in terms of how we're spending our money. And I pulled this slide. I stole both these last two slides from his presentation that he gave to the Senate Appropriations Committee a couple weeks ago. This kind of outlines on the left, how do we allocate our money today under what's called the Act 51 distribution formula? And then on the right, what's generally acknowledged as the major factors that contribute to road degradation and road issues. And our formula today largely is driven by population and road mileage, which are logical factors to look at, but don't get to the issues on the right side that special issues that cause and lead to significant costs in the roads. Traffic volumes, population, and vehicle registrations get that a little bit, but we know in certain areas of any region, there's high traffic roads and there's lower traffic roads. Truckloads and heavyweight trucks. Where do big trucks drive? Bridges are very unique cost generators. So if you have bridges, whether it's in a rural area or a populated area, the presence of bridges are going to contribute significantly to road maintenance and construction needs. Eric showed local construction costs for road construction costs around the state are highly variable. All of those factors help drive need for road funding, but really don't get factored into our current formula. The political challenge with changing any formula, including Act 51, is whenever you do it, you generate winners and losers, and that's always a challenge from a practical standpoint and a political standpoint. But our research would suggest while we're thinking about more money for roads, uh, there's also cause to spend some time thinking about how we're utilizing our road dollars as well, and to make sure we're doing it as efficiently as possible. So I am now going to close as well with kind of those key questions going forward as the House, as the administration, as the Senate gets involved in the road discussions. Um, what are the three questions that policymakers should be thinking about then? The first one is just clearly how much do we need? $3 billion seems to be the marker set by both the House and the governor. Is that the right amount? What if we got 2 billion? What if we got $1.5 billion? That changes the cost benefit for what we need to give up in the budget. What's that right number? And there may be discussion down the road on that. And then, of course, are we going to do this with new revenue, higher taxes someplace, or redirected revenue? The House very much focused on redirected revenue. The governor has an alternative focus. It's interesting if you go back to the last two road deals in '97, we bumped up the gasoline tax by 4 cents per gallon. That was really an all newly generated revenue solution at that time. 2015, it was a split. We did both. A little bit of new revenue, a little bit of redirection, and that question will have to be answered eventually in any resolution of our current debate in 2025. And then, as I just closed with, then do we do this with all money, or is there cause to maybe address how we're spending that money and make improvements to our distribution allocation of road revenues in Michigan? Um, so I hope that was helpful information. Again, our website is crcmich.org. If you haven't seen us before, please go out and visit us. Take a look at the offerings we have, not only on transportation and the budget, but a whole slew of different policy areas. And again, Arnold and Matt, thank you for the invitation to be here today. Happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Bob. Good information as always. Greatly appreciate the somewhat side-by-side comparison of the plans and where we head from here. As we noted with our last presenter, the legislature is beginning its budget discussions, budget negotiations, and moving forward. Certainly, if the past is any indication, it's typically just before July 4th when we get a budget done. But again, that will be impacted this year by what takes place on the federal level for sure, and negotiations on big ticket items such as this. So greatly appreciate your perspective and the work of the Citizens Research Council. Again, if anyone has any questions for Bob, you can raise your hand at this point. Be more than happy I'm sure Bob would be more than happy to take on questions. And as I noted, this is being recorded, and the presentations will be made available on our website in the next day or so, and we'll let folks know when that is posted. Do we have any questions for Bob or Dr. Grossman and IPPSR Services? Unfortunately, Karen had to sign off for another meeting. So, okay. Seeing no questions, keep in mind the resources that are available to you through our offices at IPSR and offices such as the Citizen Research Council, and also the governor's federal office when it comes to issues of federal concern. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As Matt noted, we already have a luncheon forum scheduled for June 17th with discussion being the impact of tariffs on our largest trading partner here in Michigan, Canada. Will feature the Mayor of Windsor and the Consul General for Canada, as well as Jason Miller, an MSU supply chain professor. And look for possibly also a forum on May 15th. Thanks again for being with us and look forward to seeing you again. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.